One can't help but think about how quickly the retail automotive industry has evolved over the last 2 to 3 years. By my best guess, the pandemic has moved us forward by at least 5 years, maybe more, and has really underscored the importance of people, process, and product. And I mean, look, there's nothing quite like a chip shortage and an employee shortage to drive that message home. However, we're also seeing a shift in consumer demand, with online retailing as a big push, and of course with governments and automakers making big plays in electrification. Joining me today is Chris Potgieter, a VP at automotiveMastermind. He has rich experience in the global retail auto industry, working with automakers in both North America and South Africa. My man, Chris, thanks so much for joining me on the Dealer Playbook.
Thank you, Michael. It's awesome to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. Now, how well did I do? How well did I do on that last name?
10 out of 10, I would say.
Man.
Definitely. I mean, it's an Afrikaans surname. I'm born and raised English. I even struggle at the best of times, so I think you pulled it off.
Does Afrikaans have like a German influence behind it?
It definitely has a German-Dutch, kind of that guttural language. Not the most pleasant to the ear.
Well,
definitely not the French, definitely not the Spanish. Yeah.
I guess it depends. You know, years ago, I went and did missionary work in the Philippines and learned to speak one of their dialects. And I remember coming home and I was filling out an application for school, and it asked if I spoke any other languages. So, of course, I put Cebuano in, which was the dialect. And basically the system came back and was like, no, it's got to be a real language. Like, what's the real language? And I was like, oh, no. Anyways, I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited to chat with you about the climate of the auto industry today. I mean, obviously, today is where I want to start, right? There was a lot of excitement around GM's recent keynote at CES, where they, showcased the new electric Silverado, and they even made some mention of autonomy. And I mean, of course, you go on LinkedIn and all of the dealers are very excited about this, and look, electrification and new Silverado and all of these sorts of things. And my mind immediately went to, but what about today? I mean, in order to get to tomorrow, I must pass through today. And I think that's where I want to start, right? We see that automakers are limiting supply to dealers who are obviously selling the vehicles, but then there's the catch-22, because if there's nothing to sell, how do I sell it in order to get more supply? And so I'm just kind of curious, from your experience, from what you've been able to now witness, and of course drawing on your past experience, what are perhaps some things dealers could be doing today to get creative, maybe to mitigate or offset the supply chain, and then of course get creative working with the resources that are at their disposal today to perhaps acquire or keep the ball moving forward?
Right. I mean, as you mentioned, supply is definitely a hot topic right now, and it has been for a couple of months. On the mastermind side, we've come out and essentially pivoted our offer. So, up until very recently, it's rarely been known by the dealers as a new vehicle sales and marketing platform. And we have piggybacked off that platform and now have started to expand that offer. So what I mean by that is, conquest acquisition. How do dealers use this technology to go out and identify other customers within their market that they didn't originally sell the vehicle to, and market to them, but not necessarily to even sell them a new car, but just to acquire that vehicle. And I think dealers have been doing that together with service to sales acquisition, kind of thinking about the service drive. How do I identify the right cars in the lane, in the service drive, and put forward a really good offer to that customer, where maybe that customer doesn't need that second or third vehicle in the household anymore because they're working remote, they're not commuting quite as much,
right?
And they're able to loyalize their customers. I think that's really what it's coming down to, is how do we keep those customers that we have sold to, that are part of our portfolio, and keep them loyal to the dealership. I think that's really probably top of mind for most dealers nowadays.
Yeah, it's interesting because it really underscores for me the importance of people in this whole mix. Like, I've always felt like the retail auto industry in particular, I mean, I've been in the industry now since I was about 16, so it's really all I kind of know. But I've always been fascinated by this concept of the shiny object.
Right.
And over the years, especially as a creator of, a so-called shiny object, the conclusion that I've come to is that the best tools in the world won't work unless I do.
Right.
Like I use the analogy of going to Home Depot and purchasing the most expensive hammer, the shiniest, nicest looking hammer I could find. And that darn thing still won't hang pictures on the wall unless I pick it up and hammer some nails into the wall, that sort of a thing. And so I think you're right. It's really interesting to be able to look or peer inside the dealership and say, okay, well, we need to develop a process. So I guess my next question to that point is, what kind of offers are you seeing any offers that are working better than others to not only acquire the vehicle, but perhaps really enforce the importance of loyalty, like human to human relationship building?
Right. I think, I mean, to your point, this is all about proactivity. It's about actually understanding the context in which we sit today. I think all the dealers definitely understand that for sure. And then thinking about, what do the next 6 months look like? Because for many of the customers, you know, independent of what tool they're using, they're going to know which customers' leases are due in the next 6 months. And I think it's about being proactive, engaging the BDCs, having those sales meetings, talking about the portfolio and which customers might be coming off lease in the next 6 months, and having those conversations today versus waiting for that call from the customer saying, hey, but I've just got a call from my financial services division. This car's lease is up next week. What car do you have for me? So I think it's about that proactivity, and that could be outbound calls, it could be emails, it could be the predictive type of marketing that we run in campaigns. But I think it's really just having, as we know in the US, it's really been a built to stock market.
Mm-hmm.
That has changed very quickly in the last couple of months. And I think the dealers, I mean, to their credit, are very entrepreneurial by nature, and they've been able to adapt very quickly to this, and have changed their processes to be more proactive, reaching out to customers. And I think that's working really well for them.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on that, it has been very inspiring, I would say, to see how quickly what we used to think was a sleepy old industry just snapped into gear and said, "Hey, we got to meet some demands here." And as I kind of alluded to earlier, I really feel like the last 2 years in particular has probably forced, whether we wanted to or not, has forced us forward by at least 5 years, in the sense
100% agree.
that we had to get creative with Zoom calls and FaceTime and Messenger and doing at home deliveries and all of these sorts of things. And I think what it's helped dealers realize is that they already have many of the tools and resources they need in order to have a much more frictionless process. And I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing on your end.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely been a catalyst. To your point, they've adapted very quickly to this. And I think, a lot of this was going to change anyways. It's just been a bit of a force factor to happen sooner rather than later. And sometimes we need that, it's often easier kind of, doing what we used to. And I think naturally everyone is a little resistant to change. So I think that this has been one of those force factors that have pulled forward what was going to be inevitable. It's digital retailing. It's not keeping so many vehicles in stock in this case because they haven't got that option right now.
Right.
But I think that this will actually change how we as an industry in the US sell vehicles, stock vehicles, and I think that gone are the days of having a couple of hundred vehicles in new car inventory. I think this
Right.
is just this will be written down in the history books, and I think this will also serve dealers well. I mean, they can run a much leaner organization. They're not going to be having significant floor plan expense, and be more generally proactive with customers, and also communicating with them, probably using technologies that will be expected from the new vehicle buyers in the future as well.
Okay. Now, I told you I wasn't, and I promised Nikki I wasn't going to throw you any curveballs. But
Sure,
here's
but
a
let's go for
curveball
it.
for you. Has anyone ever told you that you look like Robert Pattinson, the famous actor?
No, no one has. I've
This
heard
would be a
Justin
great time
Bieber.
for Nikki to come back in here and support me on this. I just had to say, Nikki, does he not resemble Robert Pattinson? Can you not? I'm sitting here this whole time. We're talking automotive, and I almost came up with a line of questioning about the upcoming Batman movie for crying out loud. Yes, we could talk about The Outsiders, the OG Rob Lowe. I just had to say it. So, call me crazy, but I'm sitting here and I'm like, do I have a crush on this guy? What's happening right now? I'm getting a Robert Pattinson. Okay, so I'll bring this back around to automotive. I promise. So let's move into because that you're right. It's all going to come down to process. No matter how you dice it, sure, process is unsexy to some, but it is the thing that's going to drive us forward through today and into tomorrow. One of the things that I've had the pleasure of interviewing some of the automakers, Mike Colleron from Nissan Global, and I've asked him about electrification, and this is where I want to kind of pivot the conversation, if that's okay. I
Yeah.
wanted to get a sense from him how long the automakers have been pursuing and or thinking about EVs. And really the point was I needed to get across the fact that usually where the rubber meets the road, we're constantly trying to react. And so I'm glad that the industry reacted the way it did to the pandemic and at home and all of these sorts of things, because they reacted very quickly. And then, of course, like you had said, that forced us to kind of evolve. But then you look from the automaker perspective, and I know you've worked with BMW. Mike at Nissan was saying that they've been thinking about it for at least 2 decades and pursuing it and toying with it and poking at it. Was it the same? Did you see that kind of same level of looking into the future with your experience at working with automakers? And how do we, in your opinion, start to get dealers where rubber meets the road to think that far in the future so that we're not necessarily always reacting, but to your point, being much more proactive in our approach?
Right. I mean, I'm thinking back to already my time. I joined the BMW group. Like you mentioned, I'm at Automotive Mastermind now, but I joined the BMW group straight out of university back in 2010. And one of the cars that I was able to take home was the Mini E. And before that, there was the Active E as well. I think you guys had that here in the States. So, that's already more than a decade ago. And before that, there were other experimental vehicles out there. At that point of time, you were in the Mini Cooper or the 1 Series, you were having, good amount of range. There obviously wasn't the infrastructure ready to support kind of the mass market for that. But I think the technology was already there.
Right.
The market wasn't, though. And there's a whole, there's many factors at play. You need to be thinking about the consumer market. You need to see how the technology, if it's ready for the infrastructure as well, that's on the ground. And every market is very different. I mean, I think the number one selling model in Norway at the moment is Tesla and electric vehicles. I mean, EVs take up a significant share of the pie when it comes to new vehicle sales. Here in the US, I think we still ended 2021 around less than 10%, about 8% of new vehicle sales. So I think that there's many different factors at play. From my time at the BMW Group, we had launched the i3 about a decade ago at this point. The i8 followed up soon after that. And I think it's really always just kind of that balancing act. When is the right time? When is the consumer going to be ready? When is it going to be supported by the infrastructure? And also from a dealer mindset as well. So that, there's kind of 3 different pieces to this puzzle.
Right.
And I think that we're getting very close to kind of prime time. You see that today. And I think Tesla as well, particularly for us in the US, has again been one of those catalysts to create this change and kind of force the rest of the OEM brands to, kind of perk up or be more aware of that and prove that there is truly a market there, and consumers are ready for this technology. So I think you kind of now is that time to start thinking about how, or knowing that this is the beginning and it's going to start scaling, and it's going to scale pretty quickly from now on.
You had mentioned something earlier that I want to just draw on for a minute. Smaller dealership footprints. So this is something that I've felt for quite some time. In fact, we've been producing the show now for going on 9 years, and I'm like a grandpa of a podcaster at this point. But I remember years ago, as we were contemplating the future and what would dealerships look like, I always felt strongly that dealerships would take on a smaller footprint. Maybe service departments would get bigger, but showrooms would get smaller. Floor plans would get smaller because we would be able to, you know, well, and we actually, I don't know if it was a BMW or something. I just saw on LinkedIn the first vehicle that can change color dynamically.
Yeah, I did see that. That was,
Did
I
you see
think,
that?
one of the announcements at CES from BMW as well. Yeah,
Okay,
I think
so
it was
from
an
BMW.
iX. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think this is really intriguing because back years ago, before any of this was even on anybody's radar as far as pandemic and how far are we going to move into the future and electrification and all that kind of stuff, I really felt like it would be smaller showrooms where there would be one of each model that you could look at, but that it could perhaps, now back then I thought maybe there would be some sort of spotlights that could change its color dynamically, but now we're seeing technology where, push of a button, a vehicle can change its entire appearance, its entire, color scheme. And then that's basically how we would work. And then dealerships today largely would become kind of like the Tesla model, where you walk in, you're like, oh, there's the Silverado, there's the F-150, there's the, the BMW, whatever. I like it. I can sit in it. I can throw on some VR goggles and test drive it.
right.
I can see it in the color I want, and then I order it and it shows up at my door. And by and large, things are really starting to move into that direction. From your perspective, though, maybe your opinion, what are things that dealers could be doing today to prepare for that, but also while, spinning the plates of the needs of today?
Yeah, I mean, I think for dealers, obviously, there's this massive capital investment that's gone into the buildings and the facilities and the constant updates that also need to get made to that. And I think that the square footage of that showroom it's always a bit of a bit of a balancing act, because OEM portfolios in terms of the product offerings have grown. I mean, if you think about all these little niches that have been carved out, whether it be sport activity vehicles, sport activity coupes. You've got kind of these crossovers between a regular sedan and an SUV product as well now for many of the makes. So I think being able to have and showcase every one of the vehicles that have been offered by a brand is almost impossible today. So
Right.
I think integrating these type of augmented realities that you were talking about, whether it be vehicle configurators on an iPad, or hopefully in the future we do see some type of VR integration. I'm sure that's going to come, and I would even question whether there's going to be a need to go into that showroom to see that VR version of a vehicle. You can just maybe plug in at home and see that for yourself. I think that there's so many tools out there today, and I think dealers have done a fantastic job with updating their websites, making sure that their inventory is displayed on those vehicle display pages, and also photographing these vehicles really well. I mean, when it came to me personally, after leaving BMW and now having to actually go out and purchase a vehicle myself, truth be told, I did a lot of online research. I looked at a lot of content that third parties were putting out there on YouTube, and I kind of made up my mind before even physically visiting the dealership in terms of what I could, what I was going to buy. And I think that, dealers that are using platforms like YouTube, dealers that are putting content out through social media, whether it be Instagram, just creating that awareness and showcasing what they have for their local community I think that's what they could be doing already today, using the technology that's in place, because I think that most consumers are spending 90% of that journey in a digital, digital world versus going into the showroom today, especially with COVID.
Yep. And you bring up a good point, because I think about my last two vehicle purchases. I purchased my truck because, I mean, it's Alberta, oil country and cattle and prairie. You got to drive a truck.
Nice. I'll get one of those one day.
Yes. Yeah. You'll have to rip my F-150 out of my cold, dead hands, is how I feel about that truck. But it was similar to your experience. It was a lot of YouTube. It was, hey, looking at the dealer website, looking up, oh, what package is that? Okay, now I'm going to go YouTube that package and see what it includes. And I think it's a generational thing by and large, because there's a group of people, not just in the industry, generally speaking, who say, no, how could I ever be in a position to make that big of a purchase without ever stepping foot into it or touching it or adjusting the seat? Then I look at my generation. I was born in '82, so I'm like, I'm like the first year of the millennial, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm old enough to be down with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but old enough to have still appreciated watching MASH on TV. You know, like I'm like
I'm
in this
86,
weird.
so pretty
Yeah.
close.
Okay. So you get it. So, but my last vehicle purchase, after I had acquired all of that information, I think because computers and technology have been a pretty big part of my life since I would say at least 11 or 12 years old, right? Internet in the home, computers, all these sorts of things. It's been easier for me to adopt new technology than even, siblings of mine that are 4 or 5 years older than me.
Right.
And so when it came time to purchase this truck, I basically found the one I wanted. I found, the dealer who had the one that I wanted, and I messaged them and said, I want this one. Can you deliver it to my driveway? And we worked it. And 4 days later, after going through, doing their approval and all that kind of stuff, the truck is in my driveway. Contrast that against my second most recent vehicle purchase, where I'm a complete laydown, and I say this, and we joke about it on the podcast, because I know what I want,
Yeah.
and I get the stimulation I need from YouTube, and from I don't know. I guess my point is, I'm rambling a little bit. My point is, because I'm so accustomed to technology, I don't feel like I actually need to go and sit in and drive and whatever. It's like I already know what the experience is going to be like. And so I can just say, that one, please.
Yeah. And I mean, that's definitely, I would say, you and I are similar in that regard. There's obviously customers out there that want to be able to test drive the vehicle. They're going to be buying that vehicle for cash. I didn't. I was with, the typical 12,000 miles a year, 3-year lease, so it's
Right.
more of a longer term rental. But I think as we start to think about the future buyers, particularly those that would be the early adopters of electric vehicles, we need to think about what is the experience. How are they experiencing other goods and other services in their day-to-day life? And
Right.
for many of them, especially those early adopters of EVs, they're going to be shopping online. They're going to be using Amazon. They have been for many years. They're going to be, ordering their food from DoorDash. They're going to be using like Fresh Direct. They're going to be living in a much more digital world, and having that presence online for dealers. I think most recognize that today, but I think that's going to play a more and more important role as new consumers start entering this market. Those born in the 90s, early 2000s, etc.
Right.
Because that's just been part of their life. So I think it already all starts with awareness. Money follows attention, and I think that as much as we spend time on the physical location of these dealers, and it doesn't really matter which brand you look at today, most of the showrooms are fantastic, super high end, nice and premium. But I think that as much attention and focus and investment goes into that, dealers should also be thinking about how am I represented online? What content am I putting out on YouTube? What does my social media look like? How do I involve myself and become a influencer well in this digital space? And that could also be participating in things like podcasts. I think this is a fantastic platform to do that. I mean, it's probably the most authentic version of digital marketing out there. And developing their brand.
Love it. Chris, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. How can those listening get in touch with you?
Probably the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn, Chris Potgieter, as you said. You'll be able to find me there. I'm currently working for automotiveMastermind, so I would love to connect with any of the listeners.
Amazing. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Michael.